switch it over to the NBA. The Summer League wrapped up last night in Las Vegas. The Heat downed the Grizzlies to finish undefeated and take the title. Now, Miami cashed as a slight dog last night and finished undefeated in Summer League play. Joe, you were great there. Right? You were right on that, undefeated.
I didn't get a single Summer League bet wrong, happy to say. Now, I may have only made one bet, but it cashed. More important, the Elam ending last night was awesome. Great way to end that game.
Well, let's take a look at the Northwest Division win totals. The Oklahoma City Thunder total is set at 55.5. The Thunder won 57 games last season and acquired defensive-minded guard Alex Caruso via trade this offseason. The Denver Nuggets, meanwhile, are at 52.5. The Nuggets won 57 games last season, and they notably lost forward Kentavious Caldwell-Pope to the Magic in free agency. Lastly, the Minnesota Timberwolves. They're at 52.5 for their win total. The Timberwolves won 56 games last season in a breakout year for Anthony Edwards. Now, Kyle Anderson did leave for the Warriors in a sign and trade. All right, Joe, let's take a look at these win totals. Are they too high, too low, or just right? We did this yesterday. We're going to start off with the Thunder, 55.5.
Just right.
Just right?
Just right. Just right would be the answer. 57 wins last year with a point differential of plus 7.4. That's more indicative of a 58-win team. So believe it or not, for as good as OKC was, they actually underperformed their expectation. They dumped Josh Giddey in the offseason. Solid move. They bring in Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein. Good moves as well. It's a young team that continues to improve. They play elite defense. They have a bona fide MVP in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. All the boxes are checked. But I say just right rather than too low in terms of betting it, because how high are the bookmakers going to go on this? At some point, the number's going to get too high and you're going to get a flood of under money. 55.5 feels very good for this team who's doing nothing but ascending.
I mean, this is a tough call for me. Obviously, they hit over this mark, slightly 57 wins, but they failed to do so the prior 7 seasons. So with the win totals, obviously, when you see it this high, and it's one of these teams, of course, with the highest in the Western Conference as well, it makes you a little bit nervous. It's just a really high number, like we talked about yesterday with the Celtics when it was at 58.5 for the Eastern Conference. It's not that I don't want to necessarily say it's the wrong number, but of course, like you mentioned, how much higher can it go? So I was a little indifferent on this one, but
Public's going to love them this year. You're going to have a lot of people picking them to win the championships next year. I can already see Greenberg jumping on the train.
All right. Okay, well, let's move on with the Denver Nuggets. Their win total is 52.5. Too high, too low, just right?
Too high here. So last year they win 57 games, right? Plus 5.3 point differential. That's more indicative of a 54-win team. So they kind of over-exceeded their expectation, which means we could expect a little bit of regression here. You mentioned this earlier. They lost Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. That hurts. It's not a killer, but it hurts. I feel, this isn't going to be a very popular opinion, I feel like their championship window is closing. Some would say, how could you say that? They just won it last year. Like, this is the championship window. Not really. The championship window opened about 4 years ago when they acquired Aaron Gordon, but they had a couple seasons where they suffered injuries and they didn't advance very far in the playoffs. Those years got squandered. Then they won the title, but this is more the back end of the window, in my opinion, than the front end. I see them going under this year, so I think this number's too high.
I agree with you. Of course, we hear the Denver Nuggets, and we still hear the ringing of Jokic and the winning, and they're just such a good team, and they can win the regular season. But at the same time, it feels like it's sometimes the tide finally turns. Not saying, of course, this team, just because they've been good in the past, suddenly they're going to be injured. Nothing like that. But I agree with you. It does feel at times that this could be a little bit too high because some of these other teams are just getting better in the Western Conference as well. So I do agree with you on that one, Joe.
The thoughts on Jokic, people will say, look, as long as you have a guy like Jokic, you're always in contention. Right, you're always in contention. But we're talking about winning 53 games in a loaded Western Conference when you're in a division with young up-and-comers like OKC and Minnesota, who we'll talk about in a minute. Jokic has been incredibly durable throughout his career. He's a big guy who's asked to put a lot of minutes on that body, especially in the postseason, and they've been running deep into the postseason. At some point, that's going to catch up. And if he starts to wear down, who are you going to lean on? Gordon's solid, right? They've got some good pieces there, but not the type of guys that are going to carry you to 53 wins if you're missing Jokic or he's compromised in some way throughout the course of the season.
He's obviously the biggest piece of that offense, but he's also the biggest guy, and he reminds me a lot of, who else? Joel Embiid. And if one of those guys goes down, we've seen time and time again as Sixers fans how that goes for the regular season. Of course, you wouldn't be taking the under if that was the case. Nonetheless, moving on. Timberwolves, 52.5. Okay. Too high, too low, just right.
Too low in my opinion. I think this is the one that's too low. Compared to OKC, there's so much in common. It's an elite defense like OKC. They've got a superstar caliber MVP in Anthony Edwards like OKC. They're bringing all the key starters back like OKC. 56 wins last year with a plus 6.5 point differential. They actually underperformed their expectation. They should have won 57 games last year like OKC. But OKC has a price of 55.5 and the Wolves are 52.5. I thought this would be at least a game higher. So I think there's an opportunity there. I would play the over. That's how I see them right now. I think this price is too low.
I agree with you. The biggest piece to this is that defense and how good they were.
Yes.
I mean, they were locking it down. And plus, Karl-Anthony Towns, I mean, this guy missed 20 games during the regular season, and they still were able to get those wins. They have a ton of young energy, and it's one of those teams, I mean, I thought they were going to make it at least to the NBA Finals. I was talking about it nonstop. So they're a really good team defensively as well on offense. They got that jolt. So I agree with you on this one. It does feel a little bit too low, and obviously in comparison to some of their teams we just mentioned. So in agreement with you on that one too.
When you're talking about overs, these young up-and-coming teams, they don't look at the regular season as this 82-game grind where they have to pace themselves, every win matters, things of that nature, right? Like there are veteran teams. The Warriors did this in the back end of their dynasty. They weren't worried about everything. They won 73 wins in that second season, and they realized that taxed them. So you take your time during the regular season, you lose a few games here and there, you're not necessarily focused on seeding, you're focused on being healthy and fresh for the playoffs. Timberwolves are still a young team that's going to go for it. OKC's still a young team that's going to go for it. Boston is not a young team that's going to go for it. I think that's a team that goes under because they're going to pace themselves a little bit this year.
Yeah.